中途半端なペイントで。
The Gawain, Lelouch's personal nightmare from the end of Season 1. And now, finally, an HG! Hooray! I'm so glad they kept going after the Satan and Albion. This line has a special place in my heart, because these HG Code Geass kits are actually what got me into mecha kits, and blew my mind and were just so fun to build. So I was very happy when they brought the line back from the dead in the first place, and happier still when they continued it past the obvious Satan and Albion into the Gawain. I wonder what we'll get next, as long as we do get something next. I don't have to kill Bandai for never making anything I like. But here we are now in 2024, still, so far, getting more of them. Hooray! Maybe this isn't the absolute worst timeline after all. But because they stopped making HGs so long ago, I had to fill in the gaps in my collection with robot spirits, and so I have the Robot Tamashii original release Gawain to compare the HG with. I also have the newer Robot Spirits version here that I just got after only finding out it existed while making this review. Pain in the arse, I would have had it years ago if I knew, but maybe I dodged a bullet. Quite quickly while building it, I felt like I started to prefer the look of the HG to the original Robot Spirits. I thought it might be the proportions, but actually they seem very similar. Now, having gotten them side by side, I think it's actually just that the HG has just better colours. It has a much deeper, glossy black, which really just looks... oh, great. A more saturated, orangey gold compared to the Robot Tamashii, which just looks, I don't know, more plain, less interest. Stands out less in comparison. It's a shame about the swirls on the HG though, and that kind of marbling that occurs in metallic plastic. Compared to how it could be and how I've seen it on older figures and stuff, the marbling could be far worse. It's actually really quite good and quite smooth overall, but in some places there are clear lines that make it look like the plastic is actually broken. And also, even though it's all undergated, which is very nice, the metallic marbleization can kind of pull in the nubs and swirl and still make it easy to tell where the nubs were in the first place, no matter what you do in terms of cleaning up them. But thankfully, compared to the figure, obviously, it's much easier to paint, considering you can take it all apart again and completely separate the gold. On the original, the copper pieces aren't actually even metallic, they're just orange, which is a heck of a shame. Really, it's the figure that needs the copper parts painted, or, well, repainted, because they're painted in the first place, the factory, of course. The updated Robot Spirits instead has the orange pieces in clear plastic, which is quite surprising. Not too bad though. It does mean it doesn't stand out anywhere near as much most of the time, but it is a reasonable change and looks fairly nice in its own right. I actually wouldn't have minded if the HGs were in clear plastic, just because then you have the option of having them clear, and you can still just paint them to be solid colour. But you shouldn't have to paint them, so it's for the best that they're not, but, you know, still. I quite like the clear, surprisingly. I just wish it had a much brighter backing. I wish it was like a bright white or something, just to make them actually stand out appropriately. But with the overall colour scheme that they've gone with on this version, they don't blend in as badly as they would on either of the other two versions of the Gawain. The copper pieces on the legs of the HG are a little larger. I actually think that they are a more accurate shape than the figures, but they are still too big compared to the original line art, where they're much smaller. But personally, I'm okay with that. I think they look good and better, really, bigger and standing out that little bit more. The Black Rebellion version is mechanically identical to the original Robot Spirits release, but not aesthetically, with the colours being the primary difference. But here, have a look at the official promo images for it, and what you would have been pre-ordering it based on. And now have a look at the actual thing. Night and day. If I had known about it at the time and pre-ordered it, I would have been so pissed. The promotional images look excellent. The gold is so super metallic, but without just being that kind of chrome plated gold that can look pretty cheap. It just looks like a really deep metallic. It would have been a little washed out, it's not a very yellowy gold, but compared to the final figure, it's so different. The figure's gold doesn't really have much metallic content at all. I mean, it does, but, you know, you set that expectation and get this, and it's quite a difference. And then on top of that, and maybe most of all, the final figure, for some reason, has a matte finish on the black. Huh? Why? The Gawain never looks matte. I will say, I expected to have much more of an issue with the matte than I do. It's actually grown on me, and I actually quite like it. But that's also because I have two others in my proper mind's eye look for the Gawain. So the fact that this is matte, I like probably just because it's so different to what I already had. The brown tones are also different between the two. On the model kit, the brown is a redder shade and also slightly glossier, I think. Personally, I think the figure's brown might look better, but it's personal preference. The only colour definitely better on the figure is the gunmetal, I feel, on the hands and joints, where it's just an actual metallic and looks deeper and nice and shinier as a result. Unfortunately, the hands on the figure, the fingers, are much uglier. They're not metallic, unlike the rest of the figure, so that they're soft for some reason and made out of a different material. I'm not sure at all why they need to be soft, or why that would be worth making them look uglier, but they are. The HG actually has ugly hands too, where the fingers are overly webbed right along their length, and it's just quite obvious and sucks. But the HG at least has options and other hands, unlike the figure which only has this one pair of hands. The updated Black Rebellion version of the figure has fixed the finger issue and painted them in the proper gold to match the rest of the figure. Kind of makes me wonder even more why the hell it was ever a problem in the first place. As I said, the HG is undergated, not just all of the gold, but everywhere it needs to be, which is wonderful because this kind of glossy black, I just would not want to sand and take away the finish and have to rebuild up that finish. I don't even know if I could get it this glossy again, because I've never done that before. The only exceptions are the back of the waist and the biceps. Back of the waist is understandable, it's one nub and hidden fairly well by the backpack, but the biceps are very unfortunate because no matter what, there's going to be a nub visible. There is only one nub on the front and two on the back, and well, it's a pure circle, so you can choose how it's rotated, but so in that case you can hide it more and rotate it and take it out of photos if you require, if you want. But like I said, I haven't sanded any of the nubs or anything at all, so let me know if you see any other nubs that I've missed. The robot Tamashii is actually pretty much nub free as well, from the front at least, but there are some on the back of the legs, and especially lots on the backpack. For the backpack they seem to have just given in and surrendered to the nubs. But still, not bad for a robot Tamashii, robot spirits. The new version somehow got rid of all of those nubs, so that I can't find a single nub on it. It just kind of makes it more strange that it's using the exact same articulation and engineering as the original figure, because it so clearly uses so many new parts and new moulds. Both of the figure's backpacks actually have a little more detail than the HG's. It's only visible from the back, so not the most important thing ever, but nice. Otherwise, except from the backpack, the HG has more detail than the original robot spirits. The original figure's hadron cannons are just completely plain on the inside, really, and completely plain on the back of the shoulders too. On mine, as you can see, I actually painted the red on it a long time ago to be more noticeable. I don't remember what it looked like stock, but I did feel the need to paint it. I did find it far too dim and blending in. The newer Black Rebellion robot spirits, however, is the most detailed of the three, by far. Again, and this is the final time I'll say it, it's strange that they made so many new parts and kept the original engineering. Essentially, basically, the entire figure in terms of armour, black pieces for sure at least, and some gold pieces, are entirely new in order to add this extra detail, which they've also done a great job of the paint with, in order to differentiate the detail and bring it out, without in any way overdoing it and compromising the original design. It's just a nice, not too shiny, light gunmetal kind of colour that matches the inner frame, spread out all across the armour in nice subtle places, along with some panel lining across pretty much the entire figure, especially noticeably on the legs. You can see it's also on the gold of the knees. They have newly added detail too, but the shins especially are where you can most clearly see the panel lines, and the fact that they've added lines and detail around all of these orange pieces. I'm a huge fan of the Gawain as it is originally, but I actually do really like this detail. Something that also took me a while to notice is that the chests on the figures are different to the HGs, and what they have coloured at all. You can see on the figures these kinds of lumps at the side of the centre of the chest are in gold, whereas on the HG they're black. And then on the sides of the chest, the HG has the nice detail of the vents being part separated in order to be gold and just stand out so much more and nicely, and be more detailed than they are on the figures. Both of the figures actually have opening cockpits, which is so nice. That is my one complaint with the modern version of this HG line, is that they don't have cockpits and pilot figures. I know that isn't the standard for HGs, but these are in a much bigger scale, which kind of gets rid of the entire justification, really. Like, I completely understand why in 1/144th scale they're not doing cockpits and tiny little pilot figures and stuff, unless you're getting an RG. But for these in 1/35, like 3 times larger scale than a master grade even, come on, cockpits, please. You could do so much more with that, and they used to have them. The old high grade kits for Code Geass had cockpits. So we know that they can fit a cockpit in 1/35 scale, and we know that they can do it at this high grade price. So come on, Bandai, you've made them P Bandai now and more expensive. Just do it. I don't know, I know it's probably something only I care about, but I like cockpits because I love a sense of scale, and it really just adds to the posing options, especially if get more figure options in the scale, or print some or anything. Have, you know, there's stuff you could do. You could have, if you have a seated pilot figure come with the kit, you could have it sitting on the edge of the cockpit, like on the hatch rather than in the seat, etc. You know, you can do and pose things if you want, if you have the stuff and have a cockpit, but not if you don't. And so really the figure does end up just completely showing up the HG in this one regard, because for whatever reason Bandai's just decided it's not worth it to do cockpits on the kits anymore, which is a real shame, because with the Gawain specifically they really could have had it the other way around and really shown up the figure, because the cockpit in the figure, nice to have and all, but it is really lacking in that it's only half of the cockpit. It's supposed to be a two-person cockpit, and that isn't reflected in the figure. And so it would have been nice, and really an especially cool cockpit, if done properly and fully in the HG, with 2 seats and 2 pilot figures. That could have been really cool. Especially thinking long term with the lack of a cockpit in the HG, is that we get no pilot figures. We miss the opportunity to get pilot figures in this scale. The original Lancelot and Gurren kits came with pilot figures both for the cockpit and standing figures. Where's our standing Lelouch? He's the main character. But it's especially disappointing with the Gawain, because, okay, with Lelouch I could cope that they could still make the Shinkiro, and who knows, maybe we'll get a Lelouch then. But the Gawain is really our only chance to get a C2 in this scale. And I know most people don't care about pilot figures this much, but in this scale, in 135, they're quite substantial. They're not, you know, huge main shelf presence figures, but they are noticeable, and they do complement their Nightmare frames really nicely when painted up and everything. So I lament the missed opportunity. Rant over, doesn't really actually matter, but something I definitely would have liked, and that just disappoints me about the line. The last thing about the backpack is that the HGs is actually inaccurate. I imagine it's just a function of the necessities of model kit assembly, really. But you see the thicker tips are much longer than the figures, and the green parts are also longer and further away from the tips than they are on the figure, which is inaccurate to the show, and definitely does actually look a little bit strange and worse, in my opinion, than the original design. Otherwise, except from the backpack, the HG has more detail, mostly in the shoulders, where you can see even from the back it has slightly more detail, but especially for the opening hadron cannons, it has a full inner frame inlay pieces for these opening parts that add so much detail and look so nice, and could really look great painted and with all the details brought out, but doesn't require it by any means and just looks really nice. And then the land spinners have a bit more detail as well, and the bottom of the feet have more detail and everything as well, and the feet in general are just kind of a bit more solid and have more mechanics. However, they don't have working wheels, unlike the figure. So if you take pleasure in that kind of thing, just that little bit of satisfaction of whee, then it's a shame. The HG also properly has two separate eyes, which are parts separated and not a sticker either. Unlike either of the figures that actually just have a red visor, basically, going across their whole face, which isn't noticeable most of the time, but when it is, it makes the HG look far better and more menacing. It does have more functionality in the shoulders though, because the gold that folds in is slightly attached to the arm. Attached is an overstatement, but it can be moved by and affected by the arm and brought back down when you bring the arm down, unlike the figures where you have to just move the gold pieces manually. It doesn't make too much of a difference because it only activates like really right at the end of the arm's range of motion going back into its side, but it is nice. The figure, however, has nice clicky detents for the arm movement in the shoulder, but the shoulder itself is on a slightly loose ball joint that's just loose enough to make it a bit annoying to get the signature T-pose and have the arms reliably stay up. They do, but it takes time and tweaking and fixing. The newer version of the figure uses the same articulation scheme here. The shoulders are attached into the body on a ball joint, but it is tighter. It's not incredibly tight, it's not as tight as the HG's, and so it's not as reassuring and sturdy as the HG's joint, but it is a damn sight better than the originals and will hold its pose. Whereas the HG's are rock solid there. Some parts actually may be too tight. The D-runner parts for the joints and everything like that can actually slightly hurt from when putting them together from the tightness. It's nowhere near like any bootleg kit degrees of tightness, but it is, I think, the closest I've ever felt with a Bandai kit, and was a big surprise to actually have to be pushing and have a temptation to use my teeth at one point actually to just squeeze the parts together, which is definitely a problem and not so nice that it's that tight, which can also make the joints a little annoying to manoeuvre in places. Since we're talking about the build, the manual is really nice. It has a lot of English and nice little cute chibi versions of the characters commenting on the build, giving you information on the build process, as well as a load of lore and specs and everything. Much appreciated, and I'm so glad everything is in English also nowadays. You can see on the cover of the manual that it says 1/35 scale, same as the old kits, but I was surprised to see that it's not actually that much larger than the Robot Spirits figures. I felt like there's usually a bit more of a size gap between the Code Geass kits and the Robot Spirits figures. I actually initially thought they were the exact same height until I properly compared them. So I kind of worried that the HG was actually out of scale. So I went through and did all the math and everything, but no, it actually is perfectly 1/35 scale. So either there's just not as much of a size difference between the kits and the Robot Spirits figures as I thought, or the figures of the Gawain are actually slightly oversized, which would be surprising. Onto Articulation, where the high grade really just kills the Robot Spirits. Every single piece of Articulation, the high grade has more range. The head can look up a little, not an insane amount, but a bit, which is down quite a lot. It can fully bury the chin, it has a nice little hole for it to go in freely. It can rotate this far. The robot spirits can only move around this much and really get much range in any direction, which has by far been one of the two most limiting factors in trying to pose it for this review. The high grade can raise its arms well past horizontal, whereas the figure can only raise them a little bit past perpendicular to the body. Both have bicep swivel, of course. Elbows on the high grade get just a little bit further than 90 degrees because it has a folding in mechanism in the forearm. Be careful when assembling that, by the way, to make sure it is underneath and inset enough, because if it's poking out when you put it together, you'll have to take it apart again, and it sucks. Actually really quite difficult to get apart, so just be careful with that. I totally didn't make that mistake. No way. I didn't learn it from experience that it sucks to get it wrong. No. On the robot spirits, the elbows get just a little sub 90 degrees. The wrists on both the high grade and the figures were the other, by far most limiting thing when trying to pose for this review. The robot spirits can barely move and can't really raise the hand at all. I'm very glad they designed it as they did so that the ball peg is attached to the arm and not attached to the hand. Otherwise I'm sure I would have broken the pegs on one of these figures, just trying desperately to get the hand into position to just move even a little bit. The high grade again has slightly more range of motion, but still not a lot. It's just a problem with the design. The way the wrist is angled at the arm just hugely gets in the way and limits articulation. I would have really liked if any of these had something like a slip joint, meaning that the wrist joint could be pulled out and extended in order to increase the range of motion a little, because it actually really does limit the possible expression in poses, especially when trying to pull from beyond the Gawain's canonical poses that it has in the anime and put it in some Lelouch poses, because his poses are like all in the wrist and arms and Chuni style, hands in front of eyes and everything. The waist on the figure doesn't really move at all, it only really gets a wiggle back and forth. It can rotate, but only slightly, whereas the HG actually gets a fair amount of movement. It can go really quite far forward, a little bit back, and a decent amount side to side, as well as much more rotation. The hips on the high grade come out far further, can do a much wider split than on the figure. Forward and back is pretty much the only part that's identical between the two, just no hindrance at all, and are forced to kick out a little to get once they get high enough up. The knees on both of them bend really far, but again the high grades bend further. At first it feels like the ankles have more movement on the figure, but it's just because the high grades are tighter at the joint that's higher up, and if you move and actually apply the necessary pressure, they move a lot. The heels on both similarly go out and back in, but only on the high grade are the heels then attached to that piece by a ball joint. This actually makes a big difference, as the high grade can stand without a stand, whereas the figure can't, because they're both just back heavy. The figure, however, can stand without the stand, if you're okay with it being a smooth criminal, but thankfully they do both come with stands, so doesn't really matter. And also they both have the land spinners, which to give themselves more surface area on the ground, and renders most of what I've just said a moot point. For the newer version of the figure, it's just slightly nicer with the printing that Bandai usually does on higher end figures and stuff for their bases, with the name and logo and stuff on it. Makes it a little more premium looking. It also comes with smaller stand support arms in order to more effectively use the slash harkens too, which is nice. The HG also does too, technically. Doesn't have they're not there specifically for it, they don't have special connections or anything, but Bandai's regular action base that they've just thrown in does include them, so same difference with the HG. In terms of other accessories, the figure comes with the energy filler that's used during that kneeling scene, but that's all, excluding the cockpit and little Lelouch figure. The newer Black Rebellion version, however, does come with slash harkens, and also, what I didn't notice from the promotional pictures, effect parts for them. Nothing major, hence why I didn't notice them, but a nice addition. The high grade, on the other hand, like I said earlier, comes with an alternate pair of hands that are, rather than splayed out, just straight. and slash Harken, which I'm not going to show because I don't want to cut them off the runner. This is my biggest problem with it, really. They're all separate fingers, which plug into a wire, which you're provided a lot of, which is good, which then the wire plugs into hands, palms, basically, really only, that you get with the kit. But there are 3 different types of fingers, index, 2 middle ones, and then the pinky are all different pieces, different part numbers, or maybe it's not the pinky, I don't know. But the fingers are all different pieces and part numbers, and they're tiny. And they just attach to wire, and I don't plan on using them currently, so I don't want to cut them out, because how am I going to store them? My main complaint in the end is just that I would have liked just one plastic piece that plugs into all of the fingers and then into the hand, just to keep them all together. It wouldn't do anything else, it doesn't have to look pretty particularly. You also don't get any fist hands, which, yeah, it's the Gawain, it's not necessary, but hey, a lot of things aren't necessary, but they're good to have and allow us to do things that aren't shown in the anime and allow us to have fun and just do stupid things. So, a pair of fists would have been nice. In the end, the HG is just quite obviously better than the original Robot Spirits, but the new version of the Robot Spirits has a bit more going for it. At very least, it is a unique look for the Gawain. And for as disappointing as I found it and its colours, it has really grown on me. Of the 2 figures, if I were to keep one for the Cockpit and little Lelouch figure, which feels pretty ridiculous to keep just for like a tiny little 2cm or something figure and Cockpit, but I do really like it. I would keep the newer version. That's everything I can think of for the review. If you enjoyed it, please definitely like and subscribe and all of that, because this video cost me money to make, because I wasn't sure I was going to get the high grade because I have the figure, and so no matter which one I sell on now, I'm going to lose money. It sucks, and I'm not monetized yet, so anything you can do to help, a like or subscribe or a share or anything, hugely appreciated, so thank you very much. Hopefully we keep getting Code Geass kits. No idea what we would get next. The next most obvious nightmare frame would be the Shinkiro. It's the most important, like most prevalent, most popular one to not have received a high grade yet. But I don't know if they would make that back to back with the Gawain, and their similarities. They're, well, identical colour schemes, frankly. And what else we would get, I don't know. I would like a Gloucester or a Sutherland, get into the grunts, but I don't know. Maybe this is all we'll get again. Kind of every release still has to leave us wondering whether that's all. Because sure, the Satan and Albion were obvious, but following them, the next most obvious and most popular is the Gawain. So maybe that'll be all we'll get. Hopefully not. Let me know what you would like in the comments. And if you didn't know, those old high grades are really good. It's been a long time since I built them, but further, I don't think they show their age at all. They're fantastic little kits, and well worth your time. Tentatively, anyway, because I haven't built them in a long time. If you want to find out for sure and want me to review them, let me know. So yeah, subscribe, because I also plan to make more Code Geass videos. I have a good one planned, and I'm also going to review the HD Lancelot Albion kit and compare it with all of the other Lancelot Albions, and do the same with the Gurren and with everything I can, frankly. So please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye.